Okay, for those of you joining us on the recorded session, welcome to Week 5 Montana Government Studies Seminar. We're going to go ahead and do share screen here. Don't have a video. All right. There we be. All right, so announcements for this week. So we've grace period is, where are you today? Is that Morocco? No, I believe that's a escape of Prague, Czechia. So is what I'm recalling when I pulled that off the internet. So yeah, just a virtual background. I just don't like you guys staring at my son, who's usually sitting behind me during these things. So. Okay. We have reached end of grace period. No more submissions for Unit 1 test or current event number 1. I did go through this morning and put in completion data for those, and now I'm working on grading them. So that should be coming into the grade book here over the next couple of days. My goal is to have it there because they're storing mid-quarter grades Monday morning. So that my goal is to have it there by that point, so that there you have an accurate snapshot of what your grade is. If your grade is low right now, realize that you can start to dig out of that hole by turning in stuff that we have coming up. For example, Unit 2 reading guide. You should now be working on that. If you do a little bit on it every day, there's no reason why you can't finish that in plenty o' time. You have 3 weeks on this one. The readings are a smidge longer. I do have posted in the course the textbook audios. I mean, don't be a hero with the readings. If you struggle with that, by all means, utilize those textbook audio. I put them in video form. That stemmed from somebody last semester who said that by putting them on YouTube, they were able to play them back at a sped up rate. And so that's what I started putting them on YouTube for that reason, so that you could have more control over how you do that playback. They're all read by different people for this class. The US class, if you were in there with me, you know that I do most of those readings. But these were put together a couple years ago by Mrs. Quinn, and so she had a bunch of different people read chapters. So yeah, you get a nice little variety of readers on that, but definitely take advantage of that. But yeah, be working on that Unit 2 reading guide. With this class and with my classes in general, I kind of give you the tools for success, but I can't make you use them. I can't make you actually learn anything. I give you all of the things needed to learn the material, but at the end of the day, I can't actually make you. But you're going to get as much out of this as you put into it. And if you slop together work at the last minute, then you're probably not going to do very well on the test, and your grade's going to suffer as a result. So just be working on it. I mean, that's why I give you multiple weeks on things, is so that you can work on it over time and do a good job. It's not so that you can put it off till the Tuesday before the end of the grace period and then slop together a bunch of crap. That's not why I do that. Don't forget the ongoing projects. So current event number 1 should already be done. It's past due, grace period's over, but current event number 2 is due March 19th. That is the same day that the map project, the map tour thing on Google Earth, is also due. So both of those, the current event shouldn't take you that long, really. I mean, we're talking half an hour, unless you choose a really long article. All I'm asking you to do is summarize the article and give your opinion on the article, and then please give me the article, either a link to it or a picture of it. If you're using a hard copy source, you can just take a picture with your phone, or you could scan it. By the way, you can scan things so that they look really good as opposed to just taking a picture of it. If you're an Apple person, if you have an iPhone, you can scan it directly to the Notes app. There's also tons of free scanning apps out there if you want to use one of those. Just search in the App Store for scanning app, and you come up with, I have like 3 or 4 on my phone, but there's one baked into your operating system, and you can scan right into the Notes app. If you're an Android person, that is a functionality that is available on the Google Drive app for Android. So I haven't tried it to see if it's available on the Google Drive app for iOS, but I know on the Android one, which please don't ask me too many questions about Android, I just don't know it that well, but I do know that that's baked into Google Drive for Android. So you can scan right to a PDF, and that makes life ever so much easier. So yeah, please give me that article in some form, and then summarize, and then give me your opinion. You agree with this, you disagree with this, you think this is good, you think this is bad, and why. Okay. Make sure you're doing the week 5 discussion forum. That needs to be done by tomorrow night at 8 p.m. I'm getting a few people reporting that they're having trouble posting replies, and when I go in to check on that, I can log in as you if I have to, and I go in and I can post replies, so it means it's not a Moodle issue, it's an issue on your computer. So if you're getting, I think they're all coming up as like invalid parameter errors, make sure that if you start seeing that, clear your browser cache. You can look up instructions for how to do that. Just Google it, because some of you use Windows, some of you are on Macs, but you can do that. You can also try it with a different web browser. So like if you're on Windows and you're using Chrome, maybe download Firefox. It's never a bad idea to just have an extra browser on your machine. Do you know any websites that show good news? I don't really like to focus on the negative stuff like car crashes, kidnapping there. I'd rather give my opinion on this. So yeah, you can definitely use like the Tribune website, or any of the Montana daily newspapers, Tribune, Missouli, and Billings Gazette. They all have a fairly decent coverage of that stuff. You can also use the TV station websites. They sometimes have some good stuff. There's some decent blogs out there as well, but just beware of getting your news from blogs. Make sure it's not overly opinion stuff. That it's more news. But I'd stick with like Tribune, KRTV, Missoulian, Billings Gazette. Reputable mainstream news sources would be my recommendation to you. Okay. Make sure you're doing the seminar work this week. So I gave you a little bit of time that you could do the CNN 10 news quiz, and then I will give you the seminar journal topic at the end of this session. Remember, those need to be turned in by 8 a.m. on this coming Monday. So I give you through the weekend for that, but then they need to be in pretty much first thing Monday morning. Again, don't wait till the last minute. Get on, get it done. Procrastination rarely leads to good things. And finally, as I say every week, please join the Remind. Please join the Remind. If you're not on the Remind, you're missing stuff. You're missing reminders, you're missing announcements. If something happens with Moodle, I shoot it out on the remind that there's an issue with Moodle. Or like last weekend, they were doing system maintenance, because of course they were. I sent that out to the Moodle list, but then I had several people emailing, "Oh, I was taking the test and blah 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 blah," and I said I put out that they were doing maintenance on the servers in the evenings. Why did you start the test in the evening? So yeah, that's just pretty please join the remind, or have your parent join the remind, or you could join the remind for your parent. That way somebody in your house is getting the updates. Surely one of you has a cell phone. All right. So our topic today, were there any questions about any of the announcements? Going once, going twice. Oh, how do you join the remind? The instructions are in the Moodle course. All right. So our topic for today, by the way, if you can, I know some of you don't have microphones on your computers, but if you have a question, just unmute and ask. I'm not always looking over at the chat, so I don't always see when somebody's put something in there. Okay, so our topic today, mining in Montana. Mining is a very important part of the history of Montana. It is one of the primary reasons that people started coming to Montana, was because of the mineral resources in this state. It was a huge part of Montana's economy really through about the 1980s. The early part of the 1980s in this state. The various mining companies, the most notable of which was what most people know as the Anaconda Company, which was part of Atlantic Richfield, there we go. That's now Atlantic Smith Richfield or something like that. But anyway, they were the #1 employer in this state. Really up until the 1980s, the early part of the 1980s when they shut down. So, first mineral resource that was exploited in this state was definitely gold. Gold! I struck gold! So the first gold rush nationally was in California, 1948. That is why the football team in San Francisco is known as the 48ers. Just kidding. It started in 48, late 48, but when most people showed up, it was 1949 or 1849. That should say 1848. I apologize for that. Good gravy. It doesn't help that in U.S. history, we're in World War II right now. So when I'm thinking about the 40s, I'm thinking 1940s, and I think my brain just did that there, so I apologize for that. But the first gold strike in Montana was in 1852, but the real gold rush in Montana started in 1858, thanks to the Stewart brothers, Granville and James. Incidentally, they were not actually miners. They were people that sold stuff to miners. The phrase is "mined the miners." And that's how they made their big bucks. And the Stewarts were actually very notable parts of Montana history. But they make their mark in an area known as Gold Creek, which is what we think of today as Deer Lodge, which started out as a mining town and is still kind of a town today. It's not a huge town. I have family in Anaconda, so there's always a little bit of rivalry there between Deer Lodge and Anaconda. But yeah, so the Stewarts really were the ones that kind of found Deer Lodge as sort of a trading area for the miners in that area. The next boom town that we're going to talk about is Bannock. This is the one that this one and Virginia City kind of have the most storied history as far as things that happened there. Bannock comes about after a discovery of gold in 1862. This was from people who had come for the Pikes Peak gold rush, and they ended up sort of fanning out, and they wandered north and ended up in what is now southwestern Montana. And so once they discovered gold in Grasshopper Creek, which is what they called it, Bannock pretty soon sprung up. Eventually, about $5 million worth of gold had been discovered in that area, and the town of Bannock had 5,000 people, which was at that time, the biggest town in what is very quickly going to become the Montana Territory. Montana Territory was actually part of the Idaho Territory for a time, and then got kind of split off during the Civil War. But Bannock became the territorial capital of Montana simply because it was the most populated place at that point. But that's not going to last very long. And by the way, Bannock was the place where the Montana Vigilantes started, although they're also highly associated with the next town we're going to talk about, Virginia City. But the Vigilantes started trying to... The sheriff of Bannock was a really corrupt guy named Henry Plummer. And Plummer was causing Plummer and his cronies. Incidentally, Plummer was actually a fugitive from justice in another state who came to Montana to kind of lay low and ended up as sheriff in Bannock, sort of by accident. But he used that position. This was one of those power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely sort of things. Plummer uses his power to nefarious ends in Bannock, and a group of vigilantes, one of whom actually was an ancestor of mine, will end up taking matters into their own hands and will actually string up Plummer because of his various killing and crime. And so then another gold discovery same year in Alder Gulch, and lots of towns will spring up around Alder Gulch. So 1863, gold was discovered in the Ruby River Valley. The miners were chased around by the Crow tribe for a while, but eventually enough miners show up because you really couldn't keep a gold discovery secret. So yeah, miners followed, and pretty soon they're going to outnumber the Crow tribe. And so the most notable town that springs up around there is Virginia City, very closely related to a town called Nevada City. They're often mentioned in the same breath. But Virginia City alone had 10,000 people and is a very well-preserved, what we call a ghost town to this day. Actually, a lot of these towns become ghost towns, and they end up being relatively well preserved because they're taken over, the care for them is taken over by the state. Incidentally, the original name of Virginia City was supposed to be Verona City. Verona was the wife of Jefferson Davis, and Virginia City was largely settled by people who had their roots in the South. And actually, Virginia City was a place of fair amount of violence during the Civil War years between people loyal to the North and those more loyal to the South. So it was originally supposed to be Verona City. The name got changed to Varina City, sort of trying to change it just enough to still know where it came from. And then there was a miners' court judge who ended up changing the name to Virginia City, and it stuck. Basically knowing that there was no way that the Union Congress was going to approve a town, called Verona or even Verena. It just was not going to happen. But in terms of the Civil War, it's 6-5 in Pick'em. Had the South come away from the Civil War as a recognized entity, if Montana would have gone with the Confederacy or with the Union. The Confederacy was quite interested in Montana because of gold, and that's one of the reasons why Abraham Lincoln was so interested in Montana becoming its own territory and becoming part of the Union system, was that he wanted that gold for the Union. So, and probably one of the better known strikes happened in an area called Last Chance Gulch. This is one of the reasons this one is fairly well known, is it's near to an area that's still populated today. A lot of these ones that we've talked about are now ghost towns. They're not places that people live. Whereas Last Chance Gulch is actually a part of Helena. You can actually go visit Last Chance Gulch, and it's not set up as a ghost town. It's an actual functioning commercial part of Helena. Actually, a really cool part of Helena. It's actually my favorite part of Helena. But Last Chance Gulch was about midway between Alder Gulch and Fort Benton. Fort Benton was not a mining town. Fort Benton was a transportation hub. Fort Benton was about the last place you could get to via steamship up the Missouri River before you hit the falls. After Fort Benton, you ran into falls and steamships couldn't go up that far. So Fort Benton was kind of the last port of call, as it were, along the Missouri River. And so if you were coming to Montana via steamship, which a lot of folks were, where they would end up would be Fort Benton. Fort Benton, by the way, cool little town. If you ever get a chance to spend some time there, they have a great museum. It's usually only open in the summers, but this summer, if COVID permits, take a trip up there. It's really cool. It's a neat little museum, and it's a neat little town. So in Last Chance Gulch, the initial strike was struck. The gold strike was struck by a group called the Four Georgians, because they were from Georgia. Actually, only one of them was from Georgia, BT Dubs. And supposedly, the story goes, the reason why it's called Last Chance Gulch is one of them said to the others, "Okay, boys, this is our last chance." Apparently, they had struck out in a lot of other places. And so they did hit gold as they, were doing that last chance. But then they were chased off by members of the Blackfeet tribe. They came back, but they couldn't find the exact spot where they had found the gold, but they knew there was gold in the area. This ends up being one of the richer areas for gold in the state. And this eventually becomes a major trading center. It was called Last Chance Gulch for a long time, like that was the name of the town. And then they changed the name because they thought that it was kind of too hickish. So the name was changed to a tribute to Saint Helena. It was called Helena. There is some dispute over the pronunciation of that. A lot of the Southerners tried to call it Helena. Folks from the Midwest called it Helena, and that's the pronunciation that sort of stuck, was Helena. And incidentally, you can always tell an out-of-stater when they're talking about Montana and they want to seem like they know something. They say, "Oh, I visited Helena," and you're like, "Sure you have." Mm-hmm. Incidentally, I have always dreamed of moving to Helena and opening up a store called Helena Handbasket. Ba-dum-bum. Okay. So, gold will eventually give way to silver. A lot of the gold resources in Montana just get mined out. I mean, that's just the plain and simple of it. There's so many miners that come into this state looking for gold that most of the rich pockets end up getting mined. Is there still a lot of gold in this state? Oh, yeah. But in order to get to it, I mean, we're talking itty-bitty little bits of gold in lots of places. And in order to get to it, they have to use basically chemical mining. And that's quite dangerous. I mean, they use things like mercury and arsenic to get those, the precious metals out of, this big bunch of dirt. And those chemicals have a tendency to get into the groundwater, and you don't want that. So the next big boom, and this was primarily around Butte, but they were striking silver in a lot of other places, was silver. So by 1870, most of the gold was played out. But in 1874, a guy named Bill Farland will strike silver in a depleted gold mine around what we think of today as Butte. Butte had been a mining community since about 1864, but in the period right after this and into the early part of the 1900s, Butte will become one of the largest cities in the western part of the United States for a time, in terms of population, because there were so many miners coming there to look for silver at this point, and then later on copper. So by 1880, silver production is outstripping copper production, or outstripping gold production in Montana. But again, Butte's real future is going to lay in copper. Copper is kind of what Butte is really known for. It's known as the Copper City, sometimes the mining city. But Butte during this time was one of the largest, if not the largest city in terms of population in the western United States.
Wasn't Butte originally going to be called Copperopolis?
I've heard that. I'm not positive on that, but I have heard that, so it would not surprise me. Butte is also known as the richest hill on Earth. In fact, they think there's probably still a ton of mineral resources, and all you would need to do to get to them is basically destroy all of Butte and the environment of western Montana. What could possibly go wrong? So this leads to huge influx of immigrants into Montana, specifically into Butte, but other places in Montana also had mining industries. It was just Butte was really the center of it. And we're talking people from Europe and even China. There were Chinese people in Montana during this time looking for work. But these groups include French, Metis, Spanish, Mexican, Dutch, German, British, Irish, and Chinese. To this day, Butte has I forget if it's by percentage or by total population, but one of the largest Irish populations in the entire country, if not the largest. I think it's by percentage. I mean, there's a reason why Butte is sort of the center during, normal non-COVID times. The biggest St. Patrick's Day parade in the state and the biggest St. Patrick's Day party is in Butte. The entire city shuts down for St. Patrick's Day in Butte. Like, the schools shut down, everything. Here, you don't see that. That's just not a thing here in Great Falls. Maybe when you're in college, or when you get over the age of 21. Everybody should go to Butte at least once for St. Patrick's Day. But again, wait until you're older. Please don't go now or anything, especially not right now. That'd be a bad idea. But sometime go to Butte for St. Patrick's Day. It's an experience everybody should have at least once in their lives. Probably no more than that, really, but just at least once. So yeah, these guys were looking for a better life. They were looking for work, and this was where the work was. So a number of these mining towns that first spring up, and there are a lot of them, more than we mentioned even in our session today. They have been preserved as ghost towns here in Montana, largely by the state government. So this includes Marysville. There's actually still a population in Marysville. It's fairly close to Helena. There's about 90 people in Marysville. And actually, that mine, there is some speculation that there is still relatively large gold reserves in it. And there was some talk of resurrecting mining there. I don't think it's really come to fruition, but there's this talk that maybe they will start mining in Marysville again. So I guess we'll see. Maybe Marysville shall rise again. Garnet, that is really close to Missoula. If you're driving down Highway 200, there's a turnoff that you can take, and it's kind of a windy road, kind of a scary road actually, but you can go and walk around if you're in that vicinity. It's a neat walk around. I don't think it's particularly well cared for, but the buildings are still standing. Granite, which is near Phillipsburg. Phillipsburg is another town that's practically a ghost town, but they have some cool stuff there. But neat day trip would be Phillipsburg and Granite, which is, again, near Phillipsburg, now a state park. Elkhorn, which is south of Boulder, typo there, now a state park. Bannock, which we brought up, that one's south of Dillon. Dillon and Bannock on a day trip would be fun too. And then Virginia City, which is also, again, highly associated with Nevada City. In fact, their like tourism website, they're together because they're really, really close. And Virginia City still has about 190 people living there. I actually know people that own land in Virginia City, and it's kind of a happening little tourist spot. Of all of of these ghost towns, Virginia City is kind of the one that people kind of come to on vacation. The other ones are more kind of day trip sort of locations. I don't know that there's any place to stay in Bannock, but you can actually stay places in Virginia City, which is kind of neat. And they even have a playhouse there when you can go and watch shows. And they do a nice job. So, yeah, that's how the ghost towns work. So in the 20th century, just to touch on this, we're going to talk more about this in upcoming sessions. And we're going to talk about the Copper Kings of Butte and Anaconda. But just to, in a nutshell, Butte was a national center of copper production, again, known as the richest hill on earth. And you can still see the after effects of this mining if you go to Butte. Butte is not what I'd call a beautiful city. It's a really cool city. There's so much history in Butte. It's another place that once COVID lifts, if you get the opportunity to go walk around, you'd call it downtown Butte, but really it's uptown because it's on a hill. But if you get a chance to walk around that area, it's so cool. So much history. But lots of stuff, mainly copper, 9.6 million metric tons of copper that came out of Butte between 1880 and 2005, which was kind of the last time that there was major full-scale mining in and around Butte. And really after about the early 1980s, that was really off and on. And copper mining is actually very, very dangerous, as we're going to talk about here in a minute. But in addition to copper, Butte has deposits of zinc. 2.1 million metric tons of zinc have come out of Butte. 1.6 million metric tons of manganese. 381,000 metric tons of lead. 87,000 metric tons of molybdenum. 22,200 metric tons of silver, and 90 metric tons of gold. So Butte is just one of those places on this earth that is just absolutely blessed with mineral resources, and people for over 100 years have done everything they can to get those mineral resources out of the ground, and in the case of copper production especially, into the pockets of mostly out-of-state rich people. That's one of the legacies of Butte, is that the miners themselves were not the ones getting rich. It was the people that owned the companies that ran the mines that were the ones getting rich. And Butte is a huge center of the labor movement in Montana, and we'll talk more about that in upcoming sessions as well. But just looking around, Butte was part of this, but the Anaconda Company, as it was known, actually had facilities in a number of Montana cities, but the kind of big three were Butte, and then Anaconda, which is just a short drive from Butte. There's actually a rivalry between Butte and Anaconda that stretches back to when Anaconda was a much bigger town than it is today. Also a very cool place to go walk around, BT dubs. Some
How
of you might...
much
Oh, go ahead.
how much metric tons of gold was in Butte, did you say?
So the extracted was 90 million
Thanks.
metric tons. I don't know that I'm ever going to ask you that on a test or anything, but it's an
Okay.
interesting fact to know. If you look, so the Butte picture is the one there on the top left. Top right, that's Anaconda. And the stack, as it's called, is still there. They can't tear it down because this was a smelter. And they used nasty stuff like arsenic to smelt and refine the copper. And there's so much of that in that stack that if they were to, say, blow it up like they did to the one here in Great Falls, you can see that down on that lower picture. That's Great Falls. Okay. If they tore down the Anaconda stack like they tore down the Great Falls stack, it would kill most everything in the area. There's that kind of arsenic and heavy metals in that Anaconda stack, so they have to keep it upright. So as you drive into Anaconda, you can see it. There's an old picture of Anaconda because you can no longer see the slag heaps. I mean, they're there, but their grass now grows on them. But that's basically mining impurities that were burned off of the copper that now sit in big piles as you drive into Anaconda. Anaconda, one of its most notable things now is a Jack Nicklaus designed golf course called the Old Works. And when Nicholas was designing the course, he wanted to use some of the slag as the sand traps in the golf course, and somebody took him out to one of the slag hills and stuck a shovel in it and said, "Pick it up," and he couldn't pick it up. And so at first they were dyeing the sand black, and now I think that it's just naturally colored because that would be a pain in the butt. So they wanted to use the slag as sand traps. Which, not a good idea. And then, of course, Great Falls. Great Falls had copper refining as well as zinc production happened here. And that was over across, if you're on the side of the river that I'm currently sitting on, that was across the river over by Black Eagle. And Black Eagle was actually a company town. It was developed, it was built by the Anaconda Company to basically house their workers. And the environmental impact of their proximity to that stack is still felt today. I used to live in Black Eagle, and we were told by the Environmental Protection Agency that we should not grow vegetables in our backyard because the soil still had enough heavy metal toxicity in it that those vegetables would not be safe to eat. This was after my wife and daughter had just planted a beautiful vegetable garden, and we had to throw all the vegetables away because the EPA said, yeah, those might make you sick. But yeah, so you can still kind of see, if you look across the river from the right spot, you can kind of see where stuff was. I mean, the roads are still there, and it's kind of near where the dam is now. But it was a much bigger facility. But a lot of folks think they should not have torn down the stack, and they still kind of harken back. It was the largest employer in Great Falls at that time. Now Malmstrom is. And so Butte, of course, the home of the very famous Berkeley Pit. This was the open pit mine where they brought out the copper ore. The pit was so deep that it tapped into the groundwater And so the water that comes in, it's not like rainwater has just filled this up. It's groundwater, and it seeps in. And if it gets too high, it will eventually overflow, and it will flow into the Clark Fork River and basically poison the Clark Fork. If you're somebody that thinks Missoula is a beautiful town, which I do, imagine, if the river running through Missoula was basically a stinking pile of death. Is it safe to swim in? No, 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 no. Never go swimming in the Berkeley Pit. A couple years back, they had a flight of geese. Butte gets horrible winter storms, absolutely horrible. And this flock of geese got stuck. They were flying over, and they landed on the Berkeley Pit, and the snow set in, and the fog, and they couldn't get out. And after a few days, there were like 300 dead geese floating on the top of the Berkeley Pit. And when they autopsied them, all of them had esophageal burns. So the water is highly acidic. They now have a water treatment plant that pumps 13 million gallons. So the estimate is it currently contains 40 billion gallons of acidic water, and they pump a bunch of that out and treat it and release it. But I mean, it still just continues. So it's never going to just be empty. There's no way to do that. So what would happen if a person were to swim in there? Would their skin burn? Probably. I wouldn't try it. Down to a certain depth, it's mostly sulfuric acid. It gets more acidic as you go down. So, yeah, I wouldn't try it. I actually had a friend who, back in the day, internet access was through a company called America Online, and they used to put trial CDs in like every magazine you'd get. Magazines used to be a thing. And so most people had a big stack of these damn things because you hated to throw away CDs, even though there's no use for them. And so he took a big stack of those CDs out to the Berkeley Pit and started throwing them into the Berkeley Pit, and he'd watch as they would like bubble and sink to the bottom. They would like melt. So yeah, don't go swimming in the Berkeley Pit. Just don't do it. Not much can live in that immediate vicinity. There was a dog that was able to live around there, but his like fur was all matted. He looked like something out of Chernobyl or something. But yeah, they're saying like bacteria and whatnot has kind of evolved and can live there now. But yeah, I wouldn't mess with it. So yeah, the Berkeley Pit, they are now starting to treat that water and release it back. And incidentally, every month, the sludge that they get out of that water that they treat yields approximately 400,000 pounds of copper. Copper, when it gets into liquid, makes the liquid highly acidic. The copper miners who were standing around in puddles of copperized water, if you had like a cut on your foot, your boots would get soaked almost immediately. And if you had any cut or sore on your foot, it could cause something called miner's foot, where basically it would eat at your feet. And if it got bad enough, you would have to have your feet amputated. Yeah, so again, don't go swimming in the Berkeley Pit. Just a bad idea. All right, so your seminar topic, journal topic for the week, with what type of mining did Montana's mining boom begin? What type of mining was the last major type in Butte in the late 20th century? So two relatively simple questions, like monkey's foot. I don't know what monkey's foot is, but okay. All right, are there any questions about anything we talked about today or anything having to do with the course? All right, so if there are no questions, I'm going to let you be free. If you have something you want to talk to me about, hang out and we'll discuss it. Oh, go ahead.
The first slide. Can you put the first slide up for me?
The first slide? Like
Yeah.
way back?
Yes.
Sure, and I will also post the slides to the Like that first slide?
The second one, sorry, right after this one.
Like that one?
The one after that. Yeah, that one.
Oh, okay. Sure. And incidentally, that the information, especially on the ones about the towns like Bannock and Deer Lodge, that is contained in much better detail on the textbook notes document
Okay.
that's in the course. Use that. Don't mine's basically a condensation of that. So definitely use that. Okay.
Okay.
So if you have something you need to talk to me about, hang out. Otherwise, be free.
Please go back to the
Have a good one.
Topic.
in a second.
And again, the journal topic will be in that presentation deck document as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, I'm still getting that one too.
Okay, I'll leave it up. I was going to turn off the recording if I could.